Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has updated its transgender policy ahead of the LA Olympics 2028. So this will prevent male athletes from competing in the women's category. So this was under the USOPC athlete safety policy. It was updated on the website. The word transgender isn't specifically mentioned, or even male athletes, but it talks about a commitment to athlete safety. The national governing bodies are going to have to follow suit. So USA Fencing have already changed their policy ahead of this anyway, but we also have cycling, boxing. This is going to affect these national governing bodies across the board. The policy change was also mentioned in a letter from Sarah Hirshland, who is the chief executive of the USOPC, and the president, Gene Sky. And it's believed that this is all to fall in line with Trump's executive order. Obviously, this represents the stance of the country. And considering the Olympics is going to be here, it only makes sense that the USOPC follows suit. And I get the impression that these organizations are following suit because they believe they have no choice, especially with the Olympics being held here. It can't be where different sporting bodies are doing their own thing, allowing men to compete in the women's category when it has been banned by federal law. So it's transgender athletes, trans-identifying males, and athletes with DSD. Male athletes in general are not allowed to compete in the women's category in order to fall in line with Trump's executive order and to prioritize safety, athlete safety. As we know, when men are allowed to compete in women's categories, female athletes are more likely to get injured. We saw what happened in the Paris Olympics, where male athletes were punching women in the face, and we cannot see a repeat of that. So the letter mentioned a series of respectful and constructive conversations with federal officials since the executive order was signed. As a federally chartered organization, we have an obligation to comply with federal expectations, the letter said, adding that the committee would work with the national governing bodies to implement the new policy. So USA Cycling, that allowed a man to win a national competition recently, that organization is going to have to comply. USA Fencing, thankfully, has already complied. Now, apparently, that policy comes into effect in August 1st. And until then, they are still allowing male athletes to compete in the women's fencing. So much so that at a recent championship, there were 7 male athletes. Absolutely horrendous. I had no idea it was that many. So until August 1st, USA Fencing thinks it's appropriate to allow multiple women to be disenfranchised. Women are still missing out on winning titles up until August 1st. Why it's not effective immediately, I do not know. If anything, it should be effective immediately for safety. And this was brought to my attention. Icons posted this recently, and it says, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 7 men. Why is USA Fencing allowing this? At least 7 males competed in the Women's National Championship at the USA Fencing Summer Nationals in Milwaukee last week. While real female athletes are sidelined, USA Fencing continues to push misogynistic policies that erase women from their own sport. Women fought for these divisions. Women deserve fairness. Women deserve better. This new policy cannot come quick enough. And it tells me that they're all for this. They're not changing their policy because they actually respect women. They're changing their policy because they have no choice. We saw the impact Stephanie Turner had by refusing to compete against a male athlete. She led to this policy change because they saw the reaction that people had. So even up until now, we're still seeing why it's so important that USOPC updates its policy and bans male athletes from the women's category and forces the NGBs to do the same. Chief executive of USA Fencing essentially confirmed that it's because they were forced. I'm not going to try to oppose the USOPC because I understand that they've been put in an impossible situation by the administration. We essentially have no choice but to change the rules because once the USOPC says this is now the policy of all our NGBs, we all have to follow it. An impossible situation? By ensuring that the women's category is protected? How is it an impossible situation for the sporting body? It's an impossible situation for the female athletes. They have to choose between being able to participate in sports and fairness and safety. That's an impossible situation, and it should never have been allowed in the first place. And of course, it does raise the question, what about these states that are doubling down on ignoring the executive order, that are doubling down on allowing male athletes into women's athletics, into women's sports? What about those states? States such as Maine, California, with these governors who don't even represent the people anymore. They're doing their own thing, intent on allowing what Gavin Newsom himself admitted to be deeply unfair. Well, if these NGBs are based in these states, they still have to comply. When it comes to the Olympics, when it comes to the Paralympics, they cannot enter male athletes into the women's competition. They cannot allow it. But it's still something that needs to be fought when it comes to our public schools, when it comes to certain colleges. It's still a battle that needs to be fought. But based on this policy, when it comes to the Olympics, it should no longer be an issue. So the safety policy document is a 27-page document, and it hasn't really changed much, which was called Article 33, Additional Requirements. And it states, the USOPC is committed to protecting opportunities for athletes participating in sport. The USOPC will continue to collaborate with various stakeholders with oversight responsibilities. For example, the IOC, IPC, NGBs, to ensure that women have a fair and safe competition environment consistent with Executive Order 14201 and the Ted Stevens Olympic Amateur Sports Act. The fact that it specifically states that this is for women to have fair and safe competition, that makes it clear that they're going to have to ban male athletes from that category.
Well, Liz, the committee added to its athlete safety policy Monday a section that will ban transgender women from competing in women's sporting events. Now, the policy states, quote, the USOPC will continue to collaborate with various stakeholders to ensure that women have a fair and safe competition environment consistent with Executive Order 14201. Now, the rule doesn't mention transgender athletes explicitly, but it does reference compliance with the executive order signed by President Trump called, quote, Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, which was also aimed at changing rules around athletes who are transgender. Now, the International Olympic Committee's framework from 2021 states the need to ensure everyone can practice sport in a safe, harassment-free environment that respects their needs and identities, but places the final authority for decisions on transgender athletes with the international and national sport governing bodies. Now, the U.S. amendment comes just months after a USOPC meeting in April where Chief Executive Sarah Hirshland said the committee had no plans to define eligibility criteria ahead of the 2028 LA Games.
And the Stevens Act 78 established the US Olympic Committee and allowed for national governing bodies to run each Olympic sport. And in 2020, Congress was given powerful oversight over the USOPC and each of its national governing bodies after the Larry Nassar scandal, where female gymnasts were left unprotected due to a series of failures and left at the hands of a predator. So if protecting women, protecting female athletes is a priority, clearly this policy, this change in policy makes sense. Congress has the power to dissolve the USOPC's board of directors and decertify NGBs if it deems that those entries have failed to follow through with any of their duties, including keeping athletes safe. Prior to this, as you heard there, they were all for it. Their previous policy said that they were relying on real data and science-based evidence rather than ideology. That means making science-based decisions sport by sport and discipline by discipline within both the Olympic and Paralympic movements. And we know what that meant. Basically, it had no problem allowing male athletes into the women's competition. If the NGBs decided that it was okay, like USA Boxing, for example, and then we were just going to gaslight everybody with pseudoscience. That's what that means. But thankfully, that's no more. We now have an updated policy, and it's about time. So I'm curious to see what happens with USA Boxing, USA Cycling. But the most important thing is implementing this policy. It's all very well having this policy, but how is it going to be implemented? We know that these policies are not worth much if they are not implemented using 100% foolproof methods. And of course, the foolproof method is sex screening, ensuring that athletes who want to be eligible for the female category must do a cheek swab, a simple cheek swab. We know that people have questions in certain sports when we look at certain individuals who claim to be female. Just saying, there's still some discrepancies out there. There's still some uncertainty. And we know that male athletes do slip through the net. They don't even say they're transgender. They pass themselves off as females. If USOPC wants us to believe that it means business, it will implement sex screening as part of ensuring that there is compliance to this policy. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.